Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
It's time for Q&A 25.
Oh, 25. I don't know why. I feel like I'm a little bit differently excited about every number.
25, because it's like a quarter of 100. I don't know.
Right? Though
Feels
now,
like a nice number.
it does seem silly because you're doing the intro and I'm about to do. Do you know how many total episodes we've released right now, like as we're recording?
Oh, gosh.
All right.
Let me look. I'm going to look
You
just
look.
real
Real fast. Because I don't know. I know we were getting
let's
close-ish and I really want to make sure we do something
Oh, well, hold on. I need to check somewhere else.
about our 100th. You know?
Yeah, so we have, let's see. Okay. This will be episode 97. Yeah. So.
All right, we have to do some
Close.
little fanfare. Because it will be a Q&A. Our 100th episode will be a Q&A. So
yes,
we will have to do a little something. I don't know, song and dance routine at the beginning. I know.
Yeah. Wild. We're very close.
And we're close to 2,000 people in the
cool.
Facebook group too, right? Like, Jesus fuck.
Yeah, we're getting there. You guys
I love
rock.
it.
Oh, so we're going to
Okay.
get into a Q&A. Kate's
Yes.
going to read the first thing.
I sure am. All right, so the first one today reads, sigh, on a shame spiral at the moment. My manager asked me to do something mundane and I kind of snapped. It seems like it gets harder and harder for me to not get triggered by the simplest things. I feel embarrassed. It's times like these that I tell myself I am unworthy of close relationships.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is a pretty universal experience.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not related to something like a manager asking you to do something, but excuse me. Just having those moments where like we know it's a little thing, we know it's mundane, but it feels like a big deal in the moment. I mean, I think we've all been there to some degree or another. And that was kind of the first thing that came to mind for me reading this was that we all mess up. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much every single day. I can say, at least for myself, every single day.
Yes, it may be small, but at least we fuck up something every day, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it can be hard in those moments, I think, when someone else sheds light on that.
Mm-hmm.
Which maybe it felt like your manager was doing in that moment when they were asking you to do something. Ugh, it's harder when other people see the fuck-ups.
Yes.
And it's not just something that we know internally, but nobody else saw that. Oh, somebody else is seeing it too, or quote unquote calling me out on it. Kind of a thing. I don't know. It's hard. But the other thing that really actually stood out to me about this, right? So when I hear the word snapped, most of the time I think that what's probably coming up there emotionally is anger.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the emotion driving that snapped kind of moment. And when we look at anger, what does anger tend to do? Anger can sometimes really be this emotion that comes to the forefront so that other emotions don't get expressed. And actually, you touched on this, listener, when you say, I feel embarrassed. That's probably the underlying emotion. And when we feel embarrassed, what can that drive us to want to do? To hide, to kind of shrivel up, to not do the thing that we're embarrassed about or quote unquote bad at, sort of a thing. And sometimes we can't do that. And so then we have to move forward anyways, but that could really build inside of us and show up as anger. So I think you're already touching on another emotion that's going on there, which is embarrassment. You said right at the beginning too, a shame spiral. feeling shame, everything in that realm. The anger can show up because it's wanting to protect us from that criticism. It's wanting to protect us from other people seeing our faults and flaws. And sometimes if we get big and angry, then that means other people don't see how actually embarrassed we are, how scared we might feel about something or whatever it may be. So that would be my guess of why that's coming up, that you're getting triggered by simple things. Is it's likely hitting on something for you that leads to that feeling of embarrassment. And sometimes when we feel really small, again, we try to get really big so that other people don't see it. And you say too, like, that it's times like those that you tell yourself you're unworthy of close relationships. Yeah, it's hard for people to get close to us when we're that like big, angry, snapping self. People don't tend to be attracted or drawn to that. They tend to want to back off from that. But you may be surprised that if you are able in some way, in some contexts, to express those more vulnerable, tender emotions, that may actually lead to other people having more empathy and understanding for where you're at, and might then create opportunities for closer relationships with other people. So those are my thoughts. What about you, Kate?
Well, I always love the idea of like looking what might be underneath anger, but it's funny because I mean, it's ambiguous, so I don't know which way they mean it, but I read they were feeling embarrassed about snapping. Like they were embarrassed
maybe
about having snapped at their boss.
No, like, you actually could very well be right there. Yeah.
Just different ways of interpreting the same thing. So whether or not that embarrassment in the thing was, in the comment, question, post, whatever. Anyway, I don't know if that was the underlying thing, but it certainly can be no matter what. And I think you're really hitting on this idea of something underlying, right? So you were talking a lot about underlying emotions that might be, being smothered or not expressed or other stuff like that. What I was also thinking is like underlying stressors that might be making this person vulnerable to emotional, I sometimes really hate this word, but I'll use it for now, outbursts, right, in quote.
Yeah.
Right, these sort of large emotions that may, from, external point of view, look like a overreaction, right, or inappropriate, or something like that, right? Like, oh, it's just a mundane thing. Why are you being so emotional, right? So, first and foremost, when I think about underlying stressors, always please comes up, right? Are you taking care of your physical self well enough, right? None of us are ever all together on our please. But, right, just look at it, assess it, see if there's somewhere there that you might be able to help out. But also, what other underlying stressors might be there in your life right now, right? I don't know what this listener is going through. I can say that most of us, almost all, there's a fucking pandemic, right? Like there's some kind of universal, unusual underlying stressors right now. Many of which are causing more underlying stressors for people as the ripple effects of that. So, those may well be there, but, what else is going on in your life in particular that might be making you vulnerable? Another thing that I was thinking about along those lines of stressors or underlying vulnerabilities is, how are you talking to and treating yourself, listener? Right? You talk about being in a shame spiral. You talk about, right, feeling unworthy of close relationships. And so just based on that, I thought it might bear saying that self-bullying counts as a stressor. It hurts to talk to yourself that way, to think about yourself that way, right? That we're not really any less impacted by self-bullying than we are by bullying by others, right? Either way, it really sucks. And it takes a lot out of us emotionally. And so, as so many things are in the world, obnoxiously, shitting on yourself about a behavior that you're trying to reduce, in many ways, can actually make you more likely to engage in that behavior. Because you are stressing yourself out. You are reducing your I guess, should we say resources, right? Your internal resources are going to dealing with how you're treating yourself as opposed to dealing with the rest of the world, right? And external stuff. So much though it can seem counterintuitive, especially considering many of the cultures in the world and how they lean on this sort of stuff, you're actually much less likely to do things like snap at your boss if you're not a dick to yourself when you snap at your boss. Right? Practicing self-compassion, right? That actually does a lot to decrease stress, and decreasing stress makes us less vulnerable. Being less vulnerable makes us less likely to be triggered. So, yeah, I think both you and I have that theme of kind of going under. Like, looking at what's behind rather than looking at the immediate moment.
Yep, I would agree. Yeah. The next one says, "Hi, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1, but as I got older and moved to New York and got better help. Yep. I got diagnosed with BPD. I'm just wondering how I can cope with the big slope of mood swings or deal with day-to-day life things without overthinking or having intense feelings where I explode." There's a lot
I know,
here.
I was going to say, my not as flippant as it might sound response is DBT.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to say, I don't want to jump in too much on your thing, but I thought about this literally just like a half a second before reading this one out loud of go and listen to our episode about BPD.
Yes.
Because we talk much more depth about like which skills to match with which BPD
symptoms or criteria.
Yeah.
That's a good point. You're right. I didn't think about that episode, but that's a really good place to direct this person. And anybody dealing with these struggles, because, you know, writ small, these are struggles that a lot of people have, and definitely writ large, these are very common problems for folks with a BPD diagnosis. So, yes, whole of DBT has things for you, but the things that I think of most specifically are, and I know I just talked about this in the last one, but please, right? It doesn't, right? Well, I guess Michelle gets hangry, but, you know, a lot of the please things might not have a literal immediate impact on what's going on, but if you're keeping up with the ones that impact you the most, that can do a lot actually to reduce the slope of the mood swings and a little bit reduce the intensity of feelings. So please is the first thing I think of. I actually did think of the ABCs, right? I know I've beaten on this drum a lot, right? But life will do plenty to add stuff to the shit side of scales. And it can weigh on us, right? That can make it hard to handle our internal landscape when there's a lot of bad things going on or difficult things, even if not bad. And so I do really recommend looking at, you know, leaning more into positive experiences that you have control over, ways that you can add pleasure and joy and humor and, you know, all of those things into your life. So that's the accumulating positive experiences part. But even, you know, building mastery, cope ahead, all of them to an extent, I think, can have a role to play in helping this listener with some of the things that they mentioned struggling with. And last but not least, and maybe another episode specifically to go listen to, would be Ride the Wave. I do think that the things that they specifically mention very much seem to have to do with these big mood swings, right? They even talk about slopes, right? And so that makes me think of like the image of riding the wave, right? And so those would be the three things that occur to me. Overarchingly, I just want to say you're not alone, right? Like, it makes sense that these are things that you're struggling with, and I hope that you're able to help yourself, just feel a little bit more even-keeled day to day. It's hard to ride out that kind of intensity regularly.
Yeah, definitely. The first thing that came to mind for me, which I will try to not get up on too much of a soapbox about, but the listener mentions originally being diagnosed with bipolar 1 and then later on getting diagnosed with BPD. And we've had other things, I feel like, in Q&As where people have said, like, I have bipolar 1 or I'm diagnosed with bipolar 2 or things like that. So in case people are wondering, there are 2 types of bipolar. Well, there's more, but bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. And then there can be kind of, I guess, subtypes of bipolar within that. But this is so common where people get misdiagnosed as bipolar when really their true diagnosis is borderline personality disorder. It happens all the time. And so, lest I get too into the different ins and outs of the diagnoses.
I think specifically men, by the way. I don't know anything about the gender of the listener who posted this, but I think there's still a reticence in our community to diagnose men with BPD. And so I do think especially, not just, but especially men get misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder for that. Which makes me grumpy as well. Yeah, totally. There's a lot of misunderstanding culturally around what bipolar disorder is. Because people will say, oh, well, that means you're happy one minute and sad the next. And that is not bipolar disorder. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm like, maybe I did say this in our BPD episode where I was talking about whatever the exact phrasing is of the criteria, but the one where it talks about like unstable lability, like increased like mood, something like that. I might have talked about this a little bit then. But yes, getting properly diagnosed is so huge, and I'm glad for you, listener, that basically once you made this move that you were able to get properly diagnosed. And also that's going to probably feel like starting from scratch too, to realize, oh wait, I'm not actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I actually really fit criteria for BPD. Whoa, like what does that mean? Because the 2 diagnoses are very different. They're treated very differently. Yes.
So I just want to say that this is unfortunately a really common experience what this listener is describing. Lots of people go through this. Yes. In terms of what can help, the thing that stood out to me the most is when you say overthinking, right? When you use that word and you're wondering what can help you with that. So what I think can be helpful with overthinking, it's going to be different for everyone, but this is sometimes where I like to recommend accepts or using some kind of really intentional distraction, depending on what you're overthinking about. Because sometimes our brains can overthink lots of things that we can't solve, that we can't control, or at least that we can't do anything about right then. You know, maybe we can do something about it tomorrow. So we're thinking a lot about it today, right? Maybe that's what's going on. But how can you have that overthinking not take over and overwhelm you and that sort of a thing? And that's where accepts can be really helpful in terms of getting your mind onto something else and off what you may find yourself overthinking about. So I feel like that might be a helpful skill to throw in addition to the 3 that Kate already talked about, is turning to some really intentional distraction when you find yourself overthinking something that you can't actually do anything about.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, on to the next.
Yeah.
All right, this one reads, does anyone else feel like everyone is struggling right now? My head just isn't right, and I'm making a bunch of unhealthy/impulsive choices and purchases. I've gotten away from my skills. What skills could I use to slow down or stop unhealthy behaviors and get back on track with being healthy?
Yeah. I mean, first thing, good on you for recognizing this, listener. Like, it is hard to stop those things in their tracks and just to recognize, what path have I gone down? Oh, I've gone down this path. Now I need to find my way back. That can be hard enough to recognize, let alone openly admit to. So this is a really, really, really great question. I just realized this. This is our 3rd one on the Q&A. And this is the 3rd time that we're talking about please today. So I don't know what it is. But that was the first thing that came to mind for me with this one, is getting back to your please skills, because I'm guessing those are probably a little out of whack right now. So I mean, right, you say at the end there, like, how can I stop unhealthy behaviors and get back on track with being healthy? again, that word healthy, like when we think about it in the context of please, that might look like literal physical health, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can I get back to eating better foods for my body? How can I get back to moving my body? How can I get back to sufficient sleep? It can look like that kind of healthy. I also recognize that healthy can mean a whole bunch of other things besides our physical body health. But that's a good place to begin, is with your body. Because like you said, my head just isn't right. So when we address stuff with the body, we're doing that bottom up process, and that can be really effective. Kate's going to talk a little bit about some top down processes too that might help you out. But yeah, I would really take a good hard look at yourself with please, and really be making an effort to try to get that stuff back, especially, and we say this all the time, and I don't know what applies to you here, doing please all at once is a lot, so picking one to start with. And I would say the A, if you have been using any kind of mood altering substances, trying to do your best to minimize that use would be a good place to start, if that applies to you. But anywhere that feels accessible, just start somewhere with the please acronym. The other thing that kind of came up for me, so I guess I'm answering your question with a question, just something though to think about is, are there any transitions or anything going on in your life that you're grieving right now? And the reason why I am encouraging you to think about that is because we are far more likely to turn to these unhealthy impulsive behaviors, which we all have something we can go to, whatever it may be. There's got to be something going on that kind of got that ball rolling, that got you away from your skills in the first place. And it can be helpful to identify that and to label that as either a life transition, if you have some changes going on in your life, or as grief. I'll also touch on this too, because your first question here, anyone else feel like everyone is struggling right now? And Kate mentioned this earlier. To some degree or another, we are all struggling as we are still living through COVID. Especially because, at least here in the United States, and where Kate and I live specifically in Washington, I mean, things have just gone back and forth and back and forth. And things are not in a good state right now, with COVID cases being on the rise, like across the country. So yeah, I mean, that's something alone to struggle with, but just really looking at that. Are you going through transition? Are you grieving something? Because that is definitely going to make you more vulnerable. And it might be that, like, once you've really gotten through that transition, you might notice some of these behaviors kind of naturally dying down. Or once you kind of really let yourself feel and experience grief, if you are grieving something in your life, that may also really help. But yeah, just something to take a look at. I don't know. I'm of the school of thought that unhealthy and impulsive behaviors don't come up out of nowhere. They come from somewhere. We just got to figure out where.
Makes sense.
So, yeah.
Well, sort of what you were ending with is what I'll begin with, which is to just be really kind to yourself, listener, because you're absolutely right. Lots of folks are struggling these days. I'm sure, Michelle, that you see it. I know that I and every other therapist I think I know sees it, right? Like, not only are the clients that we already have struggling, but tons of people are reaching out all the time, even though we're full. I mean, right? It's just, struggle is going around. So try not to be too hard on yourself for the fact that you've been kind of kicked off track. Because there's been a lot going on. But when it comes to actual skills, one of the first things I thought about was doing pros and cons. Don't do it, well, I mean, if you can do it, bless your heart. But on average, I don't think people ought to try to do it in the moment with the behavior. But if you know that you are, prone to certain types of behaviors or unhealthy choices, do pros and cons around that behavior or choice or whatever, sometime temporally distant from it. So you have, you say your head isn't right, but get your head as close to right as you can in the moment. Not in the moment, but when you go to do the pros and cons, and just come at it from that space. So then you have the pros and cons available to you when you're actually in that moment where you're having to make the decision or, implement a skill or not, or make the impulsive purchase or not, right? Try and have that available to you. And remember to take full advantage, I guess, of how DBT does pros and cons. I know I've talked about this on the actual episodes about it, etc., but I really appreciate that DBT gives a space for acknowledging what you get out of doing the unhealthy things. And I think it's important for ourselves to recognize that we're not just doing this like, whoop, I guess it's time to fuck myself over right now, right? We're getting something, right? It's filling some need, it's taking care of something, maybe not almost certainly not in a great way, but it's doing something for us. And if we can really examine what it's doing for us, A, it helps us be a little bit kinder to ourselves about what we're doing, and B, maybe that gives us some insight into other things we could do to fulfill those needs or wants. Right? If we see what it does for us, we might be able to find other things that can do that. So if you're going to do pros and cons, don't be afraid to lean into what you're getting out of your unhealthy behaviors. It's really good to take note of those for a number of different reasons.
Yeah.
Now, so pros and cons has its place, but, may or may not be enough to get you through a particular set of urge to do different things. So I would say also accepts and or improve could also be useful, right? Sort of as substitute behaviors and or distractions, right? So if you're like, well, if I sit on the couch with my phone at night, I tend to go on Etsy and make, irrational purchases. I'm definitely not talking about myself.
That's what I was about to say. I'm like, that would be you.
Yeah, well, you're right. The only difference is I'd be laying in bed and not on the couch. But yes, impulsive Etsy purchases in the evening, which, by the way, Michelle, I liked your mentioning the A in please, because it's definitely more likely to happen if I'm stoned. Purchases seem like a really good idea in that state. But instead, I might be like, you know what? If I'm reading a book, this does not happen. So, in that time that I know I'm vulnerable to doing this thing, maybe I could bring a book to bed instead and just read until I get drowsy, right? So that's sort of a substitute behavior. It would count as, one of the things in accepts. It's just occupying my mind in such a way that I'm not really even facing that impulse as much anymore. So, pros and cons, being kind to yourself, and maybe accepts or improve. Those would be the things I'd recommend.
Yeah, great. Okay, the last one says, what are good skills to decompress after an event that you already know will have triggers and be difficult? A skill to apply afterwards to get through the anxiety and triggers.
Hey, this is the first time I think this whole episode that I've gotten to say self-soothe, which is normally my favorite. Self-soothe all the way, right? This is a wonderful opportunity to just, kindly take care of yourself. Some self-soothe stuff, if you're one of those people that has a self-soothe kit, you could even take with you to the event, but definitely afterwards, right? What helps you? What is self-soothing for you? For me, this might look like tea and a bath and a book, because those are ways that I really soothe myself. On the other hand, self-soothe only works if you're within a certain sort of emotional range. If you're really triggered, maybe start with a tip skill, right? And before going into self-soothing. If you need to bring yourself emotionally down a couple of notches before you're even calm enough to try and self-soothe, that's a perfect place to apply some tip. Now, that's all for afterwards. I would definitely say also do cope ahead what is it even? Something and paired relaxation. Effective rethinking. And paired relaxation, which I do not like as well, which you can probably tell, because it's never the one I suggest. But cope ahead and it bear a lot of resemblance to each other and serve very similar purposes.
Yeah.
But I definitely would suggest one of them, at least, before going into the event, right? If you know this is going to be stressful and triggering, help yourself out ahead of time. Don't just have a plan for afterwards. So, oddly enough, I'm not talking a lot this time. That's all I have to say on that one.
Nice. Well, I'm going to say something very similar. You know, and I was like, what DBT skill does it fit into? Because most things fit under some DBT skill. And that's my superpower, according to Kate.
It is. Definitely.
So I was just thinking, yeah, I mean, kind of along with what Kate was saying about self-soothing, plan something nice for yourself. So from a logistical standpoint, as best you can, do not schedule anything else that day. Don't. Like, let's say your stressful event is a job interview. Don't schedule anything else that day. Just focus on the job interview and try to leave the rest of the day free. So i.e., try as best you can. I get it. Life can be super busy. But, you know, try to not have it be like, I'm going to go do my job interview. And then when I come home, that's when I'm going to clean the house, or that's when I have to go see, you know, my parents. And, oh, I hate going to see my parents, right? Like, try to not put anything else that might be stressful or overwhelming or like a need to do sort of thing on your calendar for that day. What you can put, though, on your calendar is if it's something that feels rejuvenating to you, you can make plans with a friend. Or plan to say, go see a movie or go out to eat, or, you know, you can make plans, but just make sure there are plans that are going to be nice for yourself, not stressful things that you have to get done. And definitely I feel like there could be elements of self-soothe present in whatever plans you might decide to make. I.e., if you make plans to order in from your favorite restaurant that night, that's self-soothing with taste. You know, that kind of a thing. So self-soothe may crop up, and it, again, self-soothe, I think sometimes we think of self-soothe the same way that we think about mindfulness is like sitting with your eyes closed, meditating, right? Which we hope by now, if you've been listening to us long enough, you know that that's a myth for that being the only way that mindfulness can look. But same thing with self-soothe. I think we think of self-soothe as like quiet, solitary, peaceful. It can be, like Kate's example, right? Tea in a bubble bath sounds pretty calm and, you know, all of that. But self-soothe doesn't have to look that way.
No.
Self-soothe can definitely look like, I'm gonna go out, I'm saying all these things that, like, yeah, hiking, totally. I was gonna think of like, I was like, oh, that's not really COVID friendly. Oh, and again, like, what is nowadays? But I was thinking, like, you know, let's say you really like to like go out and dance, and you're gonna go to like your place that your favorite place that plays music you like, and you want to dance that night. I would count that as self-soothing, right? The sound of the music. So, it can look a bunch of different ways, but that's the main thing I recommend. Clear your schedule of stressful things, because you're going to have enough after this event. The other spin that we could kind of put on that, I mean, self-soothe can apply like we're talking about, but I also think elements of improve can apply here as well. So the R, relaxation, again, I think when we're relaxing, we're probably incorporating some elements of self-soothe anyways. I also think of the briefication piece and the encouragement piece. Because if you are able to kind of plan something for yourself that's going to feel like a brief vacation, that's a good way to unwind after you've just done something really stressful and give you something to look forward to. And absolutely use the encouragement piece from Improve as well to make sure that you are speaking positively about yourself and how you handled that stressful event. Because we don't want it to be that you get home from that stressful event and your brain just goes to all the things that went wrong. We want your brain to hopefully go to some of the things that went right and be more encouraging instead of self-critical. Mm-hmm. So some stuff from Improve might really apply here too.
I like it. We wrapped up. There weren't any really long ones today, so that one felt like it went by fast. So there you go. There's our 25th Q&A. If you would like to be included in a future Q&A, you can do that by either posting into the Facebook group. We try to take a lot of those and include them in Q&As for folks who aren't in the group for later, but also for the person themselves. Or email us. I almost said the email address for the other podcast. Oh my lord, today. Oops. DBT Me Podcast @gmail.com. And we will respond to you there and in a Q&A. So we look forward to hearing from you all, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT and Me